Good morning, everyone, and good to see a whole bunch of new names on the presentation. We welcome Bruce Cairncross today, and I'd just like to do a brief introduction and then hand over to Bruce. Bruce obtained his MSc in coal sedimentology from the University of Natal in 1979, and interestingly, thereafter worked for Rand Mines Limited Coal Division and joined the University of the Witwatersrand to get his PhD in 1986. He then joined Rand Afrikaans University, the old RAU Geology department, where he served as head of department for 14 years, from 2003 to 16, during which time the university also merged with the Witwatersrand Technikon to form the University of Johannesburg, and is currently professor of geology at UJ. Most importantly, I think most of us seen some of Bruce's books and his great pictures. He's written 11 books on South African minerals and gemstones and published over 150 articles on the same topics. He is an accomplished photographer and has won local and international awards for his mineral and gemstone photos. Thanks, Bruce. We look forward to your presentation, and over to you.
Thanks, John. Thanks for that introduction. This talk is really, it's not a high-powered geology talk. It's more about geoheritage. And what I wanted to say at the beginning is have a bit of a disclaimer. I'm not a taxonomic botanist, so I do not know all of the species of the flowers that exist and that I'll be showing you. Also, once we get up to the O'Keefe area, as you heard, I'm actually a sedimentologist, so I'm not a hard rock expert either. But my interest is in geoheritage and in descriptive mineralogy. And as you heard, I'm also interested in photography. So basically, what my talk is about, it's not a current trip to see the flowers. So it's not in 2021, but in the past, we've done a few trips. And one of which was we flew down to Cape Town, and then we spent about 4 or 5 days driving up the coast and actually stopping at various of these spots, which I'll show you en route, ending up at the Springbok area and spending a couple of days there and then actually driving back. It was in the end of August, the same time as we are now, actually. And so the flowers were quite good. That's going to be the gist of my talk. The first part will be really a travel log, looking at some of the flowers, which I think probably a lot of you have done in the past, if not this year. And then when we get up to Springbok, just discuss a little bit about the history of there, how it was found, and what's happening there now at the moment as well. As I can't tell you all of the names of all of the flowers, I can give a plug for this book, which is published by Straight Nature. It's a book I can highly actually recommend. And in addition, they are my publisher, so I thought I'd just give them a plug. Also, they have a wide range of books, geology as well, as some of you may know. Nick Norman's books, Gavin Whitfield, Terence McCarthy, Bruce Rubich, on all aspects of South African geology. And in fact, Straight Nature, through Pippa Parker and her team, are the publishers of popular type of literature for South African geology. Okay, so we started off in Paternoster. The first night at a B&B, in a very nice place, obviously about a minute away from the beach. And so obviously one tends to walk around there, and here's a shot actually of the beach. And immediately, being a sedimentologist, I like what I saw on the beach. The tide's going out, and these are basically flat top ripples here that form. So when you have the high tide here, due to the wave action, you form these ripples, which are symmetrical. And then as the tide goes out, the tops get planed off and they get flattened. So we call them flat top ripples. And it's this kind of thing that is basically sedimentologists with the old cliche, the present is the key to the past. We can use these kind of modern day structures to interpret the ancient rock record. And as an example, here's a 3 billion year old outcrop of the Mazan group in northern KwaZulu-Natal, rippled throughout, together with other evidence apart from the ripples, has been interpreted as an ancient tidal deposit, and in fact is one of the oldest known, in addition to ones that are interpreted from the Barberton area. So that is just a bit of a digression in some sedimentology. But Paternoster itself is very scenic. You have a shot basically at sunset of the birds going home. Well, then we hit the road and we went first to the little town of Hopefield, and we were quite lucky. Some of these flower photos are taken actually 10 years ago in 2011, and some are more recent. But a complete carpet of these white Namaqualand daisies in front of this old house, just in the veld in Hopefield. Again, if some of you have been up the coast, there's a famous restaurant right on the beach, Meisbos Scarab, which is an open air. And basically the restaurant is actually made out of these meisbosses. You basically go inside and you can have a beautiful view of the beach. It's a buffet with all sorts of seafood. If you haven't ever been and you have the opportunity, I can highly recommend it. I presume these places are still there after lockdown, knowing what the catering and the restaurant industry has been through, but I think it's still there. It's interesting, when you eat there, you don't get a knife and fork, but you get a mussel shell as a spoon. And you eat your food and then you throw the mussel away afterwards, and it saves on the cutlery. So that's going up the coast. Then we spent a day or so in Clanwilliam, and this is in the nature reserve in Clanwilliam, overlooking the dam. In this case, the Macqualan daisies again, Dimorphotheca sinuata, but a lot of other, obviously, indigenous plants, and not just the flowers, but also the shrubs, and really, really spectacular. Then from Clanwilliam, we took a drive inland to the Biddeau Valley, seen here from a scenic view at the top before one actually descends down into the valley. And there's a farm down here. And all of the blotches of color you see here are these massive fields of the flowers. So the next few slides are actually taken down here in the valley. Here's one. In fact, if you just go back, it's actually taken down here. The problem is, you know, if you do a trip like this, you end up with hundreds of photos, and you have to select the ones, and, you know, the lots of flowers and actually close-ups. And I always think this is in the digital era, and it's fantastic. You can do it, and then just you can discard 95%. But in the days of film, it would be a very expensive exercise, actually. You couldn't just shoot your shots, in fact, willy-nilly. But really spectacular, and a great variety. Again, this is down in the Biddeau Valley. There's that farm, which I showed you from the top. Beautiful combinations of the blue and the yellow and the white. And even on the farmers' roads, I mean, even the middle Maniki here in the road is taken over by these flowers. And obviously, it's a photographer's dream to be able to do it. And while we were driving around there on the road, there's a sort of gate on the side of the road. And we stopped. And we walked in, and just off to the right, there's a roadside stall. And it's full of all sorts of things, including rooibos tea, which is grown here, and home-baked things. And it's actually run by the farmer, but there's no one there. And basically, there's a tin, and everything is priced. And it says, buy what you want and leave your money in the tin. Coming from Johannesburg, maybe in other big cities as well. That was quite an eye-opener, and a complete trust. And the tin was full of cash. So that was an honesty tin that worked really well in an environment like this. It's a pity we can't extrapolate that into our cities. Then just a little bit about geology here. Obviously, this is in the Cederberg. And in fact, last week, John Compton gave an excellent talk of his traverse from Cape Town into the Karoo, and he explained in far more detail than what I will about some of the geology. But basically, it's sandstones that form the Cederberg here. These are quite interesting. And also, in addition, on this road between the Biddeau Valley and Clanwilliam is Leipold's grave, C. Louis Leipold. Yeah, he was, as I'm sure a lot of you know, a very famous author, chef, humanitarian. And he was born actually in Clanwilliam, the son of a dominee at the NG Kerk in Clanwilliam. And in fact, his grandfather actually was the founder of the Wuppertal town in the Cederberg. And he made a request that when he died that he get buried in the mountains of the Cederberg. And here it is. If you actually stop on the side of the road, there's a board to tell you, and you go in a few hundred meters, and here's his grave, buried in the sandstones. And in addition to that, what I found interesting in the background, there's this beautiful cross-bedding in the sandstone that you see in the background here. And so, of course, that tells you something again about the depositional environment of these particular sandstones. So in a geological context, it is up here, we are talking about, it's the Cape supergroup. And again, as I say, John spoke about this, the blue that you see here, this is the total outcrop of the Cape supergroup. This is the Clanwilliam area. And if we just zoom in a bit in this shot out of Spike McCarthy and Bruce Rubige's book. The Table Mountain group in particular is the one that outcrops here, and where we were driving through. And unlike where we'll get in a short while up to the O'Keefe area, this is basically a sedimentary sequence. And at this time, it was an inland sedimentary basin here, which is part of Gondwana, about 450 million years ago, when we got the deposition of the sediments, the sand and the muds that were forming these rocks, or the sediments, that over time got buried and they hardened, they lithified. And then coming up through time even further, we have the actual compressional event of the Gondwana supercontinent with the Paleo-Pacific plate, giving you this squeezing together of these two large plates, and the closure of the Cape Supergroup C, and then later the formation of the Karoo Sea, which again John spoke about, and then the deformation of the Cape Fold Mountains. So basically a complete a sedimentary succession. So continuing our trip, we then went up further north and we stayed over in the talk of the town in Van Reynsdorp. Again, I hope it's still there. A very quirky B&B, painted completely lavender. And as you can see from the outside, it gives you a bit of a hint of what's going on inside. And it was a very enjoyable place to stay, actually. Then from there, we drove inland to Nieuwoudtville, which I believe from people who have been there now is quite spectacular for the current flowers, and a lot of things to see in the town and also round about. One of the interesting places to visit is the Kokerboom forest, which is quite close to Nieuwoudtville, which the tour guides there and the blurbs say is the largest in South Africa. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I think perhaps maybe if there are people who know the Richtersveld, there may be a larger concentration, but still it's very spectacular, these growing here in the shales along the edge of a small escarpment. And then there's a farm, which is very well known, Makiesfontein, where in places the farmer actually plows the land occasionally to re-aerate the soil so that the flowers come up in spectacular way each year, also just on the outskirts of Nieuwoudtville. And while we were there, well, you probably know, to see the flowers, you want hot, clear, sunny days that the flowers open. So if you're having an overcast, cold day, then normally you don't see anything. And just on the horizon here, we were about halfway into our trip, this cold front was coming. And in fact, it hit as we were there. So we were a bit despondent. We thought that was the end of our flower trip. But in fact, it wasn't entirely the case. It passed over quite quickly. Here's a shot, and as you can see, it already got cold. There's my wife standing in amongst these really spectacular beds of these flowers right to the horizon. So we left Nieuwoudtville, we got back onto the main road and then hit a bit further north, just the last stop overnight at Garries, at Sophia's. Again, a B&B, very comfortable, very quirky as well. It seems to be a feature of some of the establishments in this part of the world. This is the dining room where we had our breakfast, laden with all sorts of memorabilia, and they have a collection of about 100 china egg cups just out of the frame of my picture, but very colorful, very comfortable. And I hope that that's still going as well, actually. So that was at Garries, which is down here. Then we drove a bit further north and we took a turn into Skilpad Park. And it was also here when the weather wasn't too great, but we thought we'd go in anyway and see. And in fact, it wasn't bad at all. You can see that it's rather inclement weather, but in fact, the flowers were still quite spectacular. And in this case, a total concentration of these orange Namaqualand daisies. And this was taken at about midday. So it was warm, but overcast. And this is a sign which is in there. No entry, trespassers will not be prosecuted, but will become prostitutes. It was a rather a quirky sign. The flowers are of interest to everyone, including the birds. Here's a yellow finch weaving its nest and incorporating some interior decor into its nest, actually. That was quite nice. And these, which I really try to find the name of, maybe there's someone who's tuned in who can perhaps tell us afterwards, but rising like serpents out of the ground, some form of a lily. a whole cluster of these beautiful yellow. They're about probably 1.5 meters high. Very, very intriguing flowers. So that was really our travel, looking at the flowers over 4 or 5 days. And then moving into the next part of my talk, which is the O'Keepe Copper District. I've had an interest in this, not from a purely geological standpoint, but from a geoheritage standpoint, because it's interesting, as I'll discuss in a while. And some time ago, I actually published this paper in the Mineralogical Record, a publication in the USA, and on the history of it, the early history, and some of the mines, because some very interesting mineral specimens have actually come from here. You know, if one looks at geoheritage, there's 2 types of geoheritage. There's the localities, or the geoparks, which are these large geographic areas. And then there's what's called portable geoheritage. And its name is self-explanatory. It's things that can be picked up and transported. And portable geoheritage can be anything, mineralogical, rocks, or fossils. And some of these portable geoheritage items are actually protected by the South African Heritage Act, by the SARA Act. So O'Keepe has got both of these elements. It has a geographic importance, and as I'll show you, some of the minerals, portable geoheritage, are actually also important. So if we look at O'Keepe, there's this excellent book if you're interested in the geology. There's a number of firsts. It's the first economic deposit discovered by Europeans, they say, in 1685. The first mine opened there by Europeans. The first mining company formed in 1852. And interestingly, the first geological report written in South Africa was on these copper deposits. And the first geological map also was published on the O'Keepe deposits. So historically, that's quite important for us as geologists. And if you read the literature, you'll see that Simon van der Stel is the person who is actually credited with the discovery, the European discovery. And he has a very Eurocentric picture, and it's a copy of a painting in South Africa House in London, of some of the Namakwa people coming down and in front of van der Stel here with his entourage behind him down in the Cape, showing him samples of the ore that they'd brought down from the northern part of Namakwaland to show him. And he subsequently traveled up there. And so here is a copy of his diary that was translated by Waterhouse in 1932 of his journey. And on the right-hand side is a copy of van der Stel's handwritten page of the first page of his diary, and it's got there 1685, and it says August. And in fact, it was exactly 336 years ago, yesterday, 25th of August, almost to the day, that van der Stel departed to go up on his trip to discover these deposits. And so therefore he gets a lot of the credit in the literature. But in fact, if one looks at it carefully, the path was laid by quite a few other explorers before van der Stel himself, as the governor decided to go up there. In fact, only 8 years after Europeans, van Riebeck landed in the Cape in 1660, there were already rumors going around about a legendary golden kingdom called Monomotapa up north of the Cape, which was laden with golden treasures. And this was one of the instigators that caused the Dutch, and in fact van Riebeck early on, already in 1660, to send exploration parties to go and find this. And numerous of them went from about 1660 to up into the 1680s. Most didn't get all the way up to Namakwaland. Their journeys ended for various reasons. It could have been logistical, running out of supplies, sickness or whatever, or just they didn't go that far. And it was only actually when one of these explorers whose name was Overberg, which is now the name, I think, of one of the local brandies, finally succeeded in 1683 in getting up to what was known as Copper Mountain and getting some samples and bringing them back to the Cape. And when Van der Stel finally saw this, he decided to go up himself. So off they went in 1685 with a massive entourage. And they arrived there, and in fact now the site, and they spent about 10 days there excavating some shafts and actually digging. And here's a picture. This is where he excavated, and it's a national monument now. And in his diary is this sketch of the locality, and it's interesting. It kind of shows the topography up there of these hills, and there's various annotations on it. These A's are basically hills of copper, and this HVR in his notation says a hill of solid copper, which probably is a bit of an exaggeration, but actually in outcrop maybe there was a good show. Here's the encampment down here where they were obviously encamped, and there's a little fountain just off to the side. So basically he went up there, and so Europeans discovered and mined for the first time these deposits. Now, if we're looking at some of the early publications, if you just move forward into the 1800s, well, Andrew Gidders-Bain was one of the first to write a report as a presentation to the Houses of Parliament at the time on the discovery of metals in that area in the Macquarie. And in fact, this is the first geological report written by Bain in South Africa. Then Andrew Wiley in 1856 and 1859, who was originally a geologist from Ireland. He produced two publications, both of which are rather obscure because they weren't really published. They were again presented to the Parliament at the time. But Wiley's reports were by far the most detailed and the most accurate to date, because he lists at the time there were already mines active. Every mine he lists, every prospect, he gives detailed descriptions on the geology of every deposit, of the minerals, of the mineralization. So his was the first detailed, not the very first, but the really first detailed report of these deposits. And then here is the Blue Mine, which is this first mine opened in 1852, overlooking the town of Springbok. And just by the way, this is the Springbok golf course. That's the fairway here, with the flowers growing in the rough. So if you're one of these golfers who plays with a yellow ball and you hit it into the rough, you could have a problem actually to maybe find your ball in amongst the flowers. But the Blue Mine takes its mind from obviously the oxidation of the copper on the surface, forming these efflorescences of copper sulfates, things like chalcanthite, etc. That basically give it its name. And this is just a plaque that's there. It's a little bit weathered, but it gives a short description about the mining company, Phillips and King, who opened the mine in 1852. And then through time, it changed hands. And then finally, it went over to O'Keefe Copper Company. And it was declared a national monument in 1979. This is one of the first share certificates. You see the date here, 1854, the Cape of Good Hope Mining Company. So that's quite an historical document. This is in the Afrikaner Museum downtown here in the collection in Johannesburg. And then on the point of personalia is this very interesting character, Charles Bell, who was Surveyor General in the Cape from 1848 to 1872. And there's a fantastic book published by Simons on the life and work of Bell. And he was a extremely talented person, a well-established artist, a surveyor, a geologist, designer, a businessman, entrepreneur. And he also actually published some information on O'Keefe. And this is just an example of one of the many, many paintings that I just chose, because it's basically in the Macquarie land, and you can see the hill here in the background with some of the Quaker worms. If you're at all interested in any of the early history in the Cape and the art, this is really a book that one should try and get. This is also one of his paintings, and it's of Van Riebeck, again, very Eurocentric, arriving in the Cape. And it's in the South African Library, so Charles Bell painting. But what's interesting is that Bell also did other things. And in fact, he designed some of the first banknotes for the Cape Commercial Bank that you can see up here. He was a designer of those. He also, in the late 1950s, there was already the mutual assurance company had been established in Scotland, where you could take out life insurance. And Bell took out a policy of £1,000 for his one child with that company in Scotland. And then at the same time, it was formed, a company was formed here, the Mutual and Life Assurance Society of Cape Town, which today is Old Mutual. And Bell designed the logo for this company. And in fact, if you look at the three anchors in the middle, that still to this day is the trademark or logo for Old Mutual. But it didn't end there. In about 1852, Parliament was debating the merits of having a postal system and having people pay for post in the Cape. And Bell was appointed to a committee to examine this. And also they decided they would have postage stamps, as already was occurring in England. And in fact, Bell then, as one of many designs with other people, put forward the design of the Cape triangular stamp, the one you see here, Cape of Good Hope. And it was designed, it's got no perforations, because he said it's much easier just to cut these out rather than to have perforations. And amongst the philatelic people, obviously, some of these are highly collectible. So there, again, Bell was a designer of the Cape Triangular. Also, a silversmith. He has an elaborate candlestick holder that he designed, made in silver in 1853. And in fact, he did it to honor the geologist Andrew Gidders Bain after the opening of the Bainskloof Pass. And so it's quite an intricate design, as explained in the caption here. In the middle is the goddess Minerva holding a torch and a mirror. And down here at the base and at her feet, there are fossils. There are ammonites, crinoids, and there are nautiloids. So also one of Bell's many, many accomplishments. From the standpoint of O'Keefe, though, he traveled up there interested, and he wrote this report again for Parliament, Surveyor General Charles Bell, the copper fields of Little Namaqualand. So this report also is in the archives down in Cape Town, one of the very early reports. And in that report, he's got sketches of the workings up here. Here you can see he's drawn the hills. And interesting, he gets the geology right. He shows these very steeply dipping ore bodies that are being mined. He has a man with a pick, and the ore being carted away in wheelbarrows and dumped here. And in the annotation, he's got granite gneiss. And in the map on the side, which is not easy to read, but he's got Springbok Fontaine, which is Springbok, Spectacle Mine, Concordia is here. And in the annotations, the various types of the symbols, he's got granites and he's got gneiss. And there are other symbols showing the dip and strike of the beds. And interesting over here, these oblique labels say Table Mountain sandstone. At the time, they thought some of these rocks were actually part of the Table Mountain sandstone, not knowing obviously they were high-grade metamorphic rocks. So this is Charles Bell's map of the area. Well, if we look at the geology, this is out of Viljoen and Reimold's 1999 book. A simplified book, completely different to further down south where we drove through the Cederberg. This is hard rock territory, high-grade metamorphic terrains with granite gneiss, a lot of structural deformation, and also a lot of intrusives. And in fact, some of the rocks that intrude into the Namakwa-Natal belt rocks are the ones that host the copper mineralization, which takes the form of these massive sulfides, chalcopyrite, bornite, and also chalcocite. And they are obviously scattered around in this whole district, and that's hence why we see a number of these mines. And I'll show you another map of these in a while. But essentially hard rock geology. Here's just two cross sections from Potgieter's 1996 paper, and there's also a very good summary in the Mineral Deposits of Southern Africa, the 86 books of two of these deposits, the Homep East mine and the Carolsberg mine. And it shows the surrounding country rock, the granite, and these intrusive bodies, sometimes called steep structures, with this speckled area, which is the copper ore that you can see here in this diagram. And here again, you see these rather steeply dipping bodies with highly mineralized copper ore and the black, more poorly mineralized. And this forms what's called the Koperberg suite. And it's these, obviously, that were mined. Some early on, like Van der Stel, at outcrop through the oxidized part of the ore body, but then down to depth in later days. So here's some of the mines, and in this one, a lot of them you see the upside down hammers, so they are basically closed. And the ones that are outlined, I'll show you a few photographs, starting in the West: Spectakel, Nababib, Narap, Carolsberg, Tweefontein, and the Jan Coetzee mine. So, and again, these are historical pictures. I don't know whether the headgears are even still there, but there's actually Spectakel, taken some time ago when Roger Dixon and I were doing our field trip for our first book in the area. The old steam engine down here, which I think is still part of a national monument, hopefully still intact. And then the dumps here in the park just to the east of Springbok, the Carolsberg dump. Tweefontein, the old ore chutes that are remaining. A lot of these were built by the Cornish miners who actually came at the time. So there's a shot in 2011 from the distance, and that was one taken early on. And then this is the road leading up to the Jan Coetzee mine, which is around out of the distance. O'Keepe itself, well known with national monuments. Here's the famous Cornish beam pump, taken here in 2011, which now has a palisade fence around it for security, because when we were there, it had actually just shortly beforehand, it had been vandalized and some of the metal had been stripped out of it. But subsequently they had put security into it. So that's a shot on the inside. And I think that's what was stolen. And if I remember rightly, I think we were told that they caught the culprits, and I'm not sure if they managed to recover some of these and reinstall it. But basically it's a Cornish beam pump that was built in 1852 to dewater the O'Keepe mine. And the literature says it's the only complete one of its type in the whole of the Southern Hemisphere. And obviously it's a national monument. So, and here you see it in this historic photo in the early 1900s. And then the chimney stack here, also a national monument. And there you see it also in the old historic photo. Nababib mine, when we went there, obviously it was abandoned. And well, some would think it looked like rubble, but I thought it looked quite artistic. There's the old headgear there. And we'll get back to this in a while, actually. You can see here now also what I call things the blue mine. Here's a dump at Nababib with these efflorescents in the piles, in the old ore piles of this chalcantite, which is copper sulfate, but it occurs in a lot of these mines in the district. And again, Nababib, global view, there's the headgear over the village down in the distance. And some of the flowers, again, growing in the granite gneiss here. And just another view, every little nook and little crevice where seeds can become established, and I suppose where some groundwater may flow or be preserved, you find these beautiful Namaqualand daisies growing. Now, the Jan Coetzee mine also is famous for its minerals, and here again is an article, short article published by Van Betsing and Coetzee in the Mineralogical Record. Van Betsing is a retired doctor in Kimberley, a collector of minerals. There's a mineral named after him, Van Betsingite. And Joopie Coetzee ran for many, many years the Springbok Lodge and Café in Springbok. What made Jan Coetzee famous was in the late 1960s, they encountered a walk-in cavity, which actually a cave 12 by 12 meters by 6 meters underground, lined throughout by hundreds, if not thousands of quartz crystals, some up to 2 meters in length. And these were collected by all and sundry, and they even to this day can be seen dispersed around some of the farms and got as far as collections worldwide, even in America. They're very iconic quartz specimens. It must have been a spectacular sight to see underground. This was the Jan Coetzee mine in 1968 from a picture in the Cape Copper newspaper, which was published in Springbok, 1968. Here's one I took in 1992 of the headgear and the old ruins. And here's a picture of exactly the same in 2011 with nothing there. The headgear, allegedly, I believe, was sold for scrap metal. And, you know, if one is thinking of geoheritage and geoparks and preserving the geological history of South Africa, O'Keepe district must be one of the prime things. But unfortunately, for all sorts of reasons, that hasn't happened. And here's a good example where there's, from a mineralogical portable geoheritage standpoint and a geoheritage in general, the site is no longer. So here's some examples from the Jan Coetzee. It was actually opened in 1888 and was first an open pit and then was actually sunk to some depth. And these are some of the quartz crystals. Here's a young lad holding two of them up, and here's a chap holding one in his hand. It's estimated 50,000 specimens. I'm not quite sure if that's accurate, but certainly thousands came out, some individual weighing 250 kilograms. And an interesting story about these, there was an entrepreneur, geologist, a dealer living in Springbok, George Swanson, who managed to purchase about 2 tons of these crystals. And when we were there in 93, Roger Dixon and I, we went to his house, actually in Springbok, and opposite his house he has a lot where he's got a stockpile of his minerals, and including this little shed, which is, the windows were covered with newspaper. And we asked him, can we go inside to see? And he was very cagey. He said, no, those are from Jan Coetzee and I'm going to sell them. And he wouldn't tell us. But it turned out it was true. Virtually up to the height of the door were these piles of these quartz crystals that were subsequently sold to a collector, who then sold them on to another collector dealer in Europe. And these are just some of them after they were sold to the collector. I managed to see some of them. Here's that's 0.5 meter scale, the ruler. So some of these are getting up to almost 1 meter in length. Very characteristic, smoky gray quartz, often with some red hematite and little yellow barite crystals. So these are some of the minerals that I can quickly show you, and some of them are all minerals. Here's basically chalcocite, which is a copper sulfide, chalcopyrite, which is also one of the main copper minerals, calcite, calcium carbonate. There were gypsum crystals at the Jan Coetzee mine up to 2.5 meters long. There's one in our geology department we have, which is about 1.5 meters. And some of these others, let's call them secondary minerals, fluorite, hematite, and calcite. And some of these specimens, for example, the calcite and this calcite here, are in the Nababib Museum, which is actually in the town of Nababib. Here it is here. Now, again, I was interested in this because knowing that the mine had closed, I was wondering what had happened to the museum. And so in 2011, there was a curator, Karen Janneke, and here's a picture of her standing in front of the museum with the famous Clara train that used to track ore down to the coast. And here's the plaque opening the museum. But when the mine closed, Joppie Kotze from the Springbok Lodge, because of his interest, basically started paying her an honorarium to keep the museum going, which I thought was a very ethical thing to do. He unfortunately passed away last year, and I don't know how long that lasted after we were there. But here it is. This is the lodge, which is advertised extensively and with lots of accommodation for flower people. And this is inside the cafe. One part you obviously sit and eat, but he has a museum collection here. And it was this, I think, that prompted his interest in supporting the O'Keepe Museum. That's a view of it from outside in Springbok. Here's a photo of him, obviously playing the fool. And unfortunately, as I say, he has passed away. But I believe his son is actually carrying on with the business. So that was a lot to do with the past. So maybe just in closing, what about the future and what is happening now? Well, as I'm sure a lot of you know, in the local media this year, May and even earlier, Orion Minerals are looking at the Northern Cape, at Priska and in fact O'Keepe. And there's a quote here by Smart by Errol Smart, saying, geologically, I can tell you, having gone around the world and looked at terrains, the Northern Cape is an absolute dripping roast. So there is renewed interest. And yes, again, from one of the mining publications in May, Orion to acquire O'Keefe copper mines in the Northern Cape for 85 odd million rand, and completes, this is the 3rd of May 2021, a scoping study for O'Keefe in South Africa. So there is renewed interest there. And in particular, at Nababip, where Cape Copper Oxide are going to be reworking the dumps at Nababip. So here's a photo of Jan Nelson, who is a successful businessman in the mining sector. And interestingly enough, he is an ex-student of myself and Nick Bierkes. He did his degree and his honors here at Rao, and then went on to do his master's with us on the Pongola supergroup. And we subsequently tried to get him to upgrade to a PhD, but which for various reasons it didn't happen. But he went off to become a well-established entrepreneur. So when I read this and I saw that they were going to be involved at Nababip, I actually called him up and I asked what the plan was for the local museum there. And in fact, as a very peculiar coincidence, he told me that they were thinking about this and they were wondering what to do. And they've got security there at the moment. But so he and I are going to have further discussions about the museum and its collection. It's very, very important, because apart from what's there and what's in private collections, the only historical specimens in the museum early on from the 1850s are ones collected by Wiley, which are now residing in the Natural History Museum in London. So Jan and I are going to have further discussions, as I say, to see what can be done, either to preserve it intact there or maybe relocate it somewhere else to a more secure facility. So that's a promising thing. So promising for Geoheritage, but also promising for the local community with renewed interest in the mining going on there. So here's a view of, again, from the website, the Nababip Copper Oxide, in a general view of that deposit. So just in closing, hopefully you enjoyed seeing the flowers, and just maybe to have a plug for some of the geology books. Again, this is the suite which is published by Strake, if anyone is interested in any geology, and all of these are very readable, popular style books. I encourage you to go to the website and have a look, and also for the plants, obviously. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Bruce, that was fantastic, and just highlights again, you know, this amazing geological heritage that we have in this country. And as you say, we should be making every effort, you know, to preserve what we can in these remarkable places. And it's also good to see it. Nolene Pauls is on the presentation, and she's come up with some most interesting ideas about a series of talks on our sort of, you know, old legends in the geological community, and you've obviously touched on some of them this morning. So Nolene, maybe you want to share a couple of your ideas. Anyway, question time. Bruce, perhaps I can kick off. Have you seen the CPRs and the ESG reports for these early mine developments up in Namaqualand?
No, I haven't, John, to be honest, I haven't.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, it's interesting, so much of it comes back to entrepreneurs, and people to take risk, and those are the people, you know, you can't box into all the sort of challenges that we have in this country at the moment to get exploration going again.
Yeah.
Nolene, do you want to give a snapshot of your ideas quickly?
Thanks, John. I actually think it was your idea, but I will own it. So for many years now, we have been thinking about losing our legends and doing something and finding a way to actually retain the stories and the characters of our geological heroes. So John and Henry, as well, and the Overberg group, with the GSSA's help, will be doing a series of talks about these legends. And And I think John has an idea of doing a little book as well, which is fantastic. And then what the GSSA is going to be doing is a series of podcasts. Again, geological heroes, but these will be sort of like campfire stories, you know. The reason I became an exploration geologist were these stories and people like sharing what they got up to in the field, sometimes quite interesting and sometimes like quite embarrassing. But these are the stories that we would like to preserve. And, you know, with Overberg guys and with our podcast, we're hoping to be able to do something like that.
Great. Thanks, Nalin. We shall keep you busy. Not sure we'll be doing the work. We've got, you know, I believe you work long hours. So in your retirement, you'll be kept, you know, really busy. Okay, questions, ladies and gents? Comments? Who's going to kick off?
John, hi, Bruce Williamson here. I mean, just the thought to add on, I mean, surely we should be thinking, I mean, this is far-fetched stuff, but we should have a geological tour route throughout South Africa where people around the world that have interest could come and go from literally site to site. And yeah, we definitely need to preserve everything we've got. But I could just envisage, like guys go on a golf tour, you could go on a geological tour throughout South Africa visiting these sites.
Yeah, I can just answer that. I think you're 100% right. And especially if you look at this O'Keefe area, I mean, the obvious thing would be at this time of year, you could combine geology with botany, for one thing, and have like a geobotanical tour. But the other thing is the historical side of it. You know, the way the Cornish miners were involved there early on, there's a big community in the UK, historical society, involved with these early chaps who went not only here but also to South America, and they pre-COVID, okay, used to organize tour groups around the country to see where these old miners worked as part of their heritage, and that whole cluster up there. I mean, Springbok, O'Keefe, Karolsberg is so rich in history. And at the same time, I can also add about sort of geotours. In fact, Richard and Maurice Viljoen for many years have been punting and themselves were doing tours around Johannesburg, a Witwatersrand gold tour. As such, they run, well, unfortunately, as you heard, Maurice is no longer here, sadly, but they do day trips. But one could have some sort of a geo tour trip also around the Witwatersrand. Obviously, you don't have the beauty of the Northern Cape, but I think those are things that are just waiting to happen. I suppose it needs someone to do them and to organize them, but the potential is there. Yeah.
No, for those of you that didn't listen to John Compton's talk last week, and maybe John wants to comment again quickly, I think he's probably still on the presentation. He did a great talk and traverse from, you know, the middle of Cape Town up into the Karoo, and it's really, you know, apart from the scenic splendor, it's world-class geology as well. That presentation, I think, is now on YouTube, on the GSSA YouTube website, and if you go to the Overberg group playlist, you'll be able to find it there. How's it, John?
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Bruce, for a great talk. Beautiful flowers. I was just up there last week, 2 weeks ago, and really recommend it for everyone. Beautiful place to visit. And most places, I think, are still open, despite COVID and everything else.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I think geology, you know, is world renowned for its geology, you know, South Africa. And I knew of a tour group, this was years ago, that came from the States that did a 30-day tour of South Africa geology. I mean, so it gives you some indication of just how much unique and world famous geology we have here. And I think that's a great idea to put together a tour like that. But as Bruce said, someone's going to have to spearhead it and organize it and everything else. But I think there would be the interest. Yeah, and speaking of geology and plants, I did give a specific talk about that to the Kirstenbosch Room to Grow webinar, and that is available, you know, for people to watch. I think it's on YouTube. I can send people the link if they want it, or if you just go to, and that's all sponsored also by Strake Nature. And if you're a friend of the Strake Nature Club, you can get access as well through their portal. And basically just talk about the relationships of the very amazing relationship between the bedrock and the plants, and what that might be and what that's about. But I just had a question for Bruce about the copper. You know, I was quite interested in the very early reports and about the Namakwa people. And I know that there was copper jewelry that they made. But, you know, I never was successful in finding any examples of reports or archaeological reports on those copper jewelry items. And Bruce, I'm just wondering, have you had any chance to see those in any museums or any reports of those? Do you know anything about the first people who actually mined that copper and used it for making ornaments?
You know, I haven't personally seen them, but I'm, you know, quite often if you write something and it's 20 years old, you have to reread it, what you've written. And in the introductory part of that O'Keefe history article, I've got some of the references from some of the early, you know, the anthropologists, for example, who have got records of, you know, of that. And the early books, there's one of the travel records of, I think it's Colby, 1727. He's got a drawing in there of, you know, in the language of the day, of the locals actually smelting copper up somewhere, but it doesn't say specifically in the Namakwa, because even when the Portuguese were still coming along, long before the Dutch, they were on the west coast, they were interacting with the local people and they saw they had copper jewelry. But apparently, archaeologically, there's no evidence that the copper was being mined in the O'Keefe area. You know, it could be it was coming from further up north, like the Otavi mountain land, and it was being smelted and then brought down here, or actually further inland. So although the local population were known to have copper jewelry, there doesn't appear to be direct evidence that they were mining it there. It may have come from elsewhere.
Okay, that's interesting. And maybe someone could do trace element analysis of the copper to find out its source.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Great. Thank you, Bruce.
Mike Dormer had a question. Mike? You're still muted, Mike.
In the meantime, Dale, Barrow, you had a comment too about work going on up there. Something you can talk about? Just give us an update.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. We recently completed a groundwater study there. They're looking to reprocess some of the old ore and rock lying around the mine. Obviously, with the technology advancements, they can extract the copper more efficiently. So we were involved trying to look at the volumes of water that they require and how to source that. So just interesting to see and hear about it here. But thanks for the presentation.
Great.
Mike, your mic is on now. You're off again. Switch it on again. There we go.
You know?
There we go.
Right, Bruce, thanks very much for an interesting talk. I lived up in Springbok in the early 80s, and I used to walk around with George Swanson when I was at the Octa mine, the diamond mine out there. And I remember taking a walk with him from Octa across to the Noordoever, which is now a border point. In those days, it wasn't a border point, but we walked across the mountains there. He was sponsored by Shell in those days, and they were exploring or looking for indicator minerals of various things, including oil. And the sheer amazing differences that you find in the geological structure along that route is absolutely amazing. And I mean, for people to go there on a tour, there's something for everybody. You know, there's sedimentology, there's change in river routing, there's pegmatites, there's you name it, it's all up there. So it's a very interesting cross section of various types of geology. As you know, it's a real washing machine of stuff. And I could quite easily envisage taking Felix Unite's canoes down the Orange River, you know, from Noord-Oever right down to Octa, or even further down to Barken, and then coming across country and doing a 5-day trip there for interested people. And I'm pretty sure, given the amount of people that go on the canoe trips, you could get a lot of people interested in geology in that area. It's a fascinating area, and I've still got stuff from that area in my own little collection. So yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think somebody needs to head up something to look at a eco tour in that area with a geological slant. Thanks.
No, you're quite right, because I mean, apart from the copper, there's all of the pegmatites. You know, if you just go up to Steenkop and things like the Blesberg pegmatite, okay, it's not on the river, but there's a great diversity of deposits and different types of minerals there, for sure. And you know, I'm just thinking, there's a very active, you know, they used to be called a Rockhound Club, but you know, that's a bit of a disparaging name these days. But the Cape Town Club down in Cape Town is extremely active with their meetings and things, and they often just amongst themselves have trips up all the way up into Namibia, actually. You know, obviously quite a lot of those things are for collecting trips, and obviously you don't want to denude any small outcrop or whatever, but they are active and they are interested, and in fact Minsa links with both the Cape Town Club and with our local Johannesburg Club with a lot of the talks. And quite often, you know, it's the amateurs. I mean, we all sit as geologists, and we've seen and done a lot, but quite often the amateurs are the ones who know often a lot of detail about a small area that we may not really know about. So sure, that Orange River trip would be fantastic.
Yeah, good points, Bruce. I mean, Duncan Taylor is a great resource. You know, he's a bit quiet, but he's done some superb work with that group. And of course, don't forget diamonds. The other thing for Nolene, we mustn't forget about the characters like George Swanson, you know, Baxter Brown. You could probably throw, you know, Christo Visa in there when you come to places like Octa. You know, old George probably saw more deposits in the Makwaland than any of us will ever see. I mean, he was an amazing guy.
Yeah, Swanson is interesting. I mean, at some stage, I think he either owned or the high, you know, the porphyry copper deposit. Yeah. And also many years was the owner of the Blue Lace agate mine in Namibia, although he didn't originally discover it, but he was the one who developed it and made it quite famous. Yeah. I see there's a question on the chat. How many mining sites have been declared as a national monument? I don't know if that means for South Africa, but in the O'Keefe area, I mean, I know of, there's obviously the beam pump, there's the chimney. I think that Narab old engine is a national monument. There's the orbicular granite outcrop, which is a national monument. So there are several there already up there. So these are quite a bit of interest.
Bruce, interestingly, do you have that list of national monuments when it comes to, you know, geological localities? I mean, what's happened to Langlaagte? I mean, I believe that's been destroyed, for example.
I know if you wanted to press this talk, we'll talk about Langlaagte. It's an absolute disgrace. There's Amazon in there now, and they've been there, and basically, let's not talk about that. In fact, the GSSA have been involved in that with the Johannesburg mayor, but it got nowhere, unfortunately.
Yeah. Anyway, if you have that list, it'd be great to see it and share it with the group, because you know those places should be looked after.
That's a good question. I don't have a list like that. I just know the ones obviously one goes to, you know, Dwas River, and as I say, so. But they should. I wonder whether SARA have got such a list. They should have.
Maybe it's something you and I can follow up and see if we can get hold of one.
Yeah.
Nolene wanted to say something.
Thanks, Henny. I just wanted to say, Bruce, you're absolutely right. There are so many groups doing these kind of things, and I think it would be a very valuable exercise to just tie them all together and have a list or links of what everybody's doing. I mean, you know, the GSSA Geoheritage group are doing fantastic work. So I think that's probably something that we should also be looking at.
Yeah, we just do a basic register, Nolene, and publish it, you know, publish it in the Geo Bulletin or on your website, and, you know, we can build it and add to it as we go along.
Great idea.
Before I give Gordon a chance, Nolene, the reason I asked you is I think we should precipitate now and ask every person here to start making notes as of today, just to jot down names and stories you know, just to make a note of it so that we can start collecting this and start collating this. We must now stop talking about it and start doing something to bring this all together. And by your smile, I can see that you're going to be the person that is going to do this from us in the beginning. Okay, you don't have to answer that. Let's just hear what Gordon has to say at this point in time.
Thanks, Nelly, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, with a surname like mine, I feel like the raider of the Lost Ark. I flew down to an auction of O'Keefe copper mine in around about the year 2000 to go and lick up the remnants that were on auction. That's why I feel a bit guilty now about the geological heritage that shifted from there in a manner. But I think I need to mention a name. He was CEO of a company I met down there. I don't know where he is nowadays. Henny would probably know. A chap by the name of Eddie Legg. They bought a lot of the equipment there, which went up to the DRC, and it was it equipped a mine there. And I understand it's still operating. That is so O'Keefe, you can say, lives on. It's not entirely dead. He doesn't need Orion to wake them up. They've just been transferred to the DRC. Concerning the rehab regulations imposed on mining companies, it might possibly used as an excuse to remove all traces of mining. That might need to be addressed, because I take a point. A mine in Point is Hartbeesfontein gold mine in the Klerksdorp area, where I'm currently sitting and speaking from. There's no evidence that there was ever a mine there. Nothing. You ride around, oh, this used to be here, that. There's nothing there. And why do I mention that? Well, Harties is pretty historically important in the sense that it had a headgear at the number 2 shaft, reinforced concrete headgear, one of the first circular concrete line shafts in the country. And it was specifically shaped like a lighthouse, and there's no other reinforced concrete. There was no other, because it doesn't exist anymore, reinforced concrete headgear shaped like that. And Harties was particularly renowned for a very controversial mining method used to extract gold from narrow tabular deposits, and it was called cave mining. It was a system where there was little, if zero, internal support in the stopes, and it was designed to actually allow the hanging wall to collapse, and it worked very successfully. Henny, I'm sure, can feed a lot into that. These are facts that that would be lost in the passage of time, and there's many reasons why that is so, but yeah, that is a sad fact. But in the Stilfontein area, there still remains a very significant headgear. It's the headgear of the old Stilfontein mine called Margaret Shaft. And it's got a lot of historical significance because of the steel shortage of the Second World War. It was the first reinforced concrete headgear in the world, designed by, and part of the design team was a certain Bernard Roberts, whose grandson died late last year. So, you know, there's very little relating to that. It is still standing. Who knows when they're going to demolish it? But I think it's an excellent suggestion from Henny that anybody with snippets of information concerning the mines, because that's your geological history that will remain to be documented for future generations.
Thanks, Gordon.
Okay, if I can just get in there, Henny. I mean, Gordon, I presume you retired and got nothing to do, so we've just got a sort of central, that's not central, but this guy to look at the geological legacy there. And I guess you're going the same way, Nolene.
While I'm busy asking for help, something else that the GSSA is doing is we're putting together a series of short talks on geoscience careers. So all the careers out there for our students and our young graduates to look at, and they might not know that they're there and how to go about it. So if anybody has any ideas and you would like to tell us about your field and how fantastic it is, I'm going to put my email into the chat. I would love to hear from you. Henny and John, thanks for letting me punt that.
Yeah, well, just got yourself some more work. Huh? Keep it up.
Sorry, John and Henny, can I butt in? Bruce Williamson again. My wife and a couple of friends have been supporting the little artists in Hillbrow. And the lead guy is the guy, Ramaruta Makabe. And he's kind of taken it upon himself to specialize in painting headgears. And I'm busy trying to put him in contact with the Sibanya guys, because I know Neil Fruneman has been quite interested in collecting headgear paintings. So I'm going to see if he can generate some work for himself. But maybe an idea if we could find a patron or funder of, and we could use a guy like Ramaruta to go around the country and paint pictures of these headgears and just preserve them whilst, nice physically to preserve, but the paintings would be great as well.
Oh, that's a great idea, Bruce. You've got yourself a project as well, I see.
So you'll see Nolene's mail is in the chat box, so please pick it up and start jotting down ideas. Thank you.
Okay, any last questions? John Blaine, you had a query there.
Leon Fenter's got his hand up. We can hear you, Leon. Go ahead.
Yes, I just back to the Macroland. It's just a question. Well, it's not related to the subject really, but what about the rare earths in the Macroland, and especially the south? I know they were busy with the rare earth minerals there close to Van Reinsdorp, Neertsville, between Neertsville and Ruriesfontein, places like Cairncross and things like that. And I know that Koreans and Chinese got involved there. So can anyone comment on that? Okay. I know it's off the subject now.
No, that's fine. Jock Harmer, is on, or have you left? Jock Harmer?
He's left.
Okay. Yeah, just Leon, I mean, we can find out more info and send us your email and we'll get it to you. But and Jock Harmer would be the expert, and then also Gerard Meintjes. You know, Namaqualand, I think in our view, is still unexplored. And you know, if you look at it, you've got sort of Black Mountain up in the northeast, and you've got Springbok O'Keepe in the middle west, and then you've got Copperton in the southeast, and there's this great big gap in the middle, and there has to be a whole lot more there, you know, including probably nickel deposits, more copper deposits, and obviously rare earths. My limited understanding of Cairncross was that the metallurgy and the mineralogy was quite complex, and actually extracting the rare earths was difficult and expensive. But that's just, you know, that's a very uninformed comment. Maybe someone else, Ed Cable, you know, did you work on Cairncross or rare earths, Ed?
Thank you.
While we wait for Ed to come on, John, you've got a question? John Blaine?
Yeah, no, Henny, thank you. I just put up asked the question there. Is there any chance the Minerals Council has any interest in the subject of mining heritage? You would have thought that they would be the prime resource to preserve the history of what has been the source of their existence if they do nothing else. So that might be something to push to their side. But then an aside, just related to Namaqualand, I just recently drove right across Namaqualand, And I was absolutely astounded at what has happened at Gamsberg, where this iconic flat-top mountain was talked about for so long as the source of this massive zinc deposit, and now it's being mined extensively. Vedanta is the operator. But I was totally confused by the profile. There is the most massive waste dump on the side of this thing that it's almost going to destroy the topography. And I wonder if the environmental or the sort of the people who approve these things took that into account in the iconic scenery of the Macroland. We're going to have another flat top mountain, which will not be natural. So it was an amazing sight, but it really took me by surprise.
Thanks, John. Rainy Meyer is at present busy writing up an early South African hydrologist for an e-book on hydrogeology. That's just on the note here. Ed, are you unmuted now?
Yes, hi Henny. Yeah, I can't add much more to the Cairncross story. We certainly did some work on it many years back, and I think under modern technology and so on, that these areas should warrant a new look, basically.
Yeah. Okay, Leon, we'll follow up with you. Thanks, Bruce. That was really tremendous, and you've obviously, highlighted a number of key points of interest that we need to apply our minds to. You've got Nolina, another layer of work to do. So, and we'll be back to you for another talk, I think, in the latter part of the year as well. So we look forward to that. But thanks, that was tremendous.